Ladies and gentlemen, I believe we are live. I apologize for the late start. Unfortunately, I got no oil pressure, but you don't want to hear about my problems. Let's get started with the live stream. So we have a guest, which I want to say first of all, thank you for sharing your time to help us learn more about MMT, which is modern monetary theory. So we're going to first of all start off with explaining what that is for people who have not heard of this before, and then we'll go on from there. So go ahead and introduce yourself and let us know where we can find you and give us a basic explanation for what MMT actually
Sure.
is. Introduce yourself. Let us know.
Sure. So my name is Shane. I used to do KRTD Media, so I think that's how we had initially met. And I'm currently a student at Torrens University, Australia. So that's a program that was put together. One of the program I'm in was put together by MMT economist Stephen Hale. I'm not sure
Introduce yourself.
if we're having Stephen Hale, and that's a program that combines modern monetary theory and ecological economics. I'm currently doing that. That's a master's program, and I am also working with this nonprofit with Warren Mosler, who's the father of MMT, on the project called Understanding MMT. Okay, it appears the host is frozen. I'm not sure if he heard anything that I had to say. Okay. So, unfortunately, it looks like we lost our host. I was going to go ahead and explain what MMT is and works. So, MMT is a framework for explaining how monetary systems function, particularly modern monetary systems. Oh, you're back.
Yep, go ahead. I don't know why. As
Sure.
soon as we went live, the whole stream went down, but it looks like it's back now.
So MMT
Just in case, yeah, go over it again, just in case.
Yeah. So MMT is a framework for explaining how monetary systems work. It basically just explains monetary operations. So there's two halves of MMT. There's a descriptive half and there's a prescriptive half. So the difference between the two halves is one explains how things work and the other explains what should we do with this knowledge now that we know. And MMT actually only proposes one policy. MMTers, the economists, sometimes propose other policies, but the only policy MMT itself proposes is a federal job guarantee. But to be more specific, MMT is a framework for explaining monetary systems. So it's monetary operations. How does the government spend? How does it spend when it's on a gold standard? How does it spend when we're on a fiat system? How do things work? What are the legalities? That's basically MMT. Now, of course, there's a lot more to it than that, but that's kind of my basic.
So, who came up with MMT? What's the origin of this? Where's this coming from?
So that's a fun one. So in the 90s, Warren Mosler, who he was a bond trader, and he realized that, and if I get his story somewhat wrong here, I'm just going from memory, and I work with him in the nonprofit that I work at. But Warren Mosler in the 90s put out a paper called Soft Currency Economics. It's now a book, but it was a paper at that time. And he learned all this from working in the financial sector. He was a bond trader. The story kind of goes as follows, at least Warren's story. So this is before Italy was part of the Eurozone. Italy used to have its own currency. I think it was called the lira. And they thought they were going to default. So Warren was part of a group, and I'm forgetting the name of it now, that did things with bond trading. And what they did was they purchased about $100 million in lira, in bonds. And when they did that, they flew to Italy. They somehow arranged a meeting with the government in Italy, and Warren explained to them that they were not going to default. It was not possible for reasons X, Y, and Z. We can get into some of those reasons when we get further discussion. The next day, Italy paid out all their bonds, and Warren Mosler's firm made about $300 million in lira after explaining to the Italian government that they would not be able to default. So Warren later put out a paper called Soft Currency Economics. I think it was in 1993. And this is kind of where MMT gets its origin story. There's also others in Australia. Bill Mitchell had been working on similar works. Randall Wray in the US as well. And Bill Mitchell, Randall Wray, Warren Mosler, Matt Forstater, there were a number of them. Those are typically considered the founders of MMT. But Warren.
So we don't want to get into too much details of the history. I just want to get a general idea because I definitely want to make sure we cover as much as possible, and cover definitely some of the questions and concerns that people have had about MMT. Now, before we jump off of the origins, do you have any comments in terms of ideological roots of this? So whoever the biggest people who are pushing it, are they coming from a particular ideology, right wing, left wing, centrist, or like?
Well, here's the interesting thing. There's a mix of people who are pushing MMT. There are conservatives who really like the job guarantee. Most of the MMT economists, I would say, are progressive for the most part. There are some conservative MMT economists, but it varies. Conservatives, progressives, socialists.
So I think, like you mentioned before, it seems to be, for lack of a better word, bipartisan. So it's not like some Marxist, socialist, whatever. There's interest across the board. So let's move on to one of the first questions. So proponents of MMT argue that deficits don't matter as long as inflation, we love that word, inflation, is controlled. How does MMT propose to manage inflation effectively without relying on traditional monetary policy tools?
So that's an interesting way that you put it. So MMT economists don't necessarily say the deficit doesn't matter. What they say is the deficit matters for a lot of reasons. It could be too big, it could be too small. But if we're looking at the deficit, we have to understand first what the deficit actually is. And the deficit is essentially the difference between the money the government spends and the money the government taxes back at any given time. So if I spend $100 into the economy and I tax back 80, The economy is left with 20, so we record a negative 80 on the government side of the balance sheet, and we record a plus 20 on the private sector's side of the balance sheet. I'm not going to go into foreign sector. I don't want to make it too complicated, but that's what the deficit is. Now, a lot of MMTers say that the deficit would say the deficit is too small. They'd say we're not actually doing enough spending to stimulate the economy. So they wouldn't say the deficit doesn't matter. Now, to your question about inflation, the
Sorry to interrupt. We seem to be having bandwidth issues, so I'm gonna remove myself from the video. So it'll just be.
Okay. So when it comes to managing inflation, it's not necessary. What you have to understand is, what is the cause of inflation? It's not necessarily that we're spending money. Money creation itself does not facilitate inflation. The money itself is just money. It's just currency. During COVID, most of the inflation was caused by supply chain issues and price gouging, for example. So you have to address the root causes. If you're spending too much money at a particular thing and there's too much money being directed, that's why during World War II, they had people purchase bonds. Now, these bonds were not to fund the war effort. These bonds were to manage inflation. Save your money. Don't bid up prices, because the government didn't want you spending a whole bunch of money while they were doing it. So essentially, there are different ways to manage inflation. You can sell bonds to manage inflation. That's not necessarily an MMT approach, but it's one approach. You can do price controls. You can do things that specifically would deal with bottlenecks in supply chains. So you want to deal with the specific causation of inflation. You don't just want to say, oh, well, to spend a whole bunch of money, it's going to cause inflation. That's not necessarily true. It depends. Everything is nuanced. So that's kind of my answer on that question. If you have any follow-ups or if you have any additional questions there.
So really, really quickly, you mentioned price controls, which is a very controversial current topic. So I don't know if you've been following the very, in my opinion, bad faith dialogue regarding price controls and Kamala Harris. Have you been listening to that stuff?
Yes.
So as far as I know, even though I see liberal media kind of just letting it slide by and not really pushing back, I see right-wing media all over it, because their whole thing is, anytime there's something that is aimed at helping normal average people, they have to fight against it. And the typical method is to fairmonger and say, it's garbage, or there's a poison kind of a something. They get really, really animated whenever it's something to help regular people, right? So she's talking about doing a ban on price gouging. I don't know if you listened to when she spoke about it. Another game they've been playing, and I see this in liberal media as well as right-wing media, for a long time they've been playing like she's running on no policies. She doesn't have any policies, even though she was going all over the country talking about these policies, right? Before she officially put it out there, she's been talking about it at these rallies, and then she gives it out, and people are still acting like they don't know what she's talking about. But I don't know how much you heard, but she did discuss things like investigating, like using different mechanisms of government to investigate bad actors in terms. I don't know. Okay, for a second. Who might be taking advantage of the crisis by raising their price because of, say, supply chain issues, and then the supply chain issue.
So,
Can you hear me?
yes, you're good now.
But anyway, so what that sounds like to me, because I like to understand what things are rather than just have it fed to me. So I've never heard of price controls before, right? I just heard Right Wing Media talking about it. So I said, what is this thing? And from everything I've read, she is absolutely not talking about price controls. So what is your understanding of price controls relevant to the kind of stuff she's discussing?
Well, it kind of depends because she hasn't. Yes, she has the price control policy, but she hasn't put out necessarily a very detailed explanation of what that policy is on her website. So, there's a number of things she could be talking about there. So, one could be, believe it was either
But
Nixon
just
or
just sorry
Carter.
to interrupt, but
Yeah, you're frozen there. So we lost our host again there. But what I was going to say is this has been tried by by Nixon, by FDR. Oh, somebody's pointing that out in the chat. um, and and there's different ways to do it. Nixon did some kind of council, which kind of tried to manage things. Oh, you're back. Yeah. So
hey,
there's
can you hear
different
me?
ways to do it. When Nixon, yes, go ahead.
Okay, so I don't know what's wrong with the connection. I've lowered the resolution to the lowest possible resolution. I've shut down all my other devices on Wi-Fi. So I don't know why it's so bad. It'll be good now. Otherwise, what would be probably better is we might have to do this as an offline thing, and then we can broadcast it later on so that people get the because important stuff we're talking about. I really want people to be able to, get the whole.
Absolutely.
Is there any way we could? Can I? One thing else I can do is not do two of us on video at the same time. I'm not sure how to do that because if I remove myself, then you can't hear me. Can I just turn off my camera? Where do I turn off my camera?
It's the little
Stop
step.
cam. Let's see. Stop cam.
Maybe it'll be better
Okay,
that
let's.
way. Hmm. Yeah, now I can't hear you. Okay. Okay, I can't hear you.
Okay, so let's try this audio only. That's the
Okay.
lowest we can get. Only audio. And you know what? I'll even go further than that. Let's do the background as well. No background. So I'm not going to send this beautiful picture. I assume that's taking up some bandwidth as well. Let's see. Just have a.
Okay.
All right. So what I was trying to say quite a while ago, when you started responding about price controls, I just wanted to comment right away that you started off by saying she mentioned price controls. But as far as I know, Kamala Harris has never mentioned anything about price controls. That's only a right-wing framing. They're trying to say she's talking about price controls. But I don't know if you've heard her mention anything about price controls. I haven't heard her say anything about price controls.
No,
I
so
think
she
it's
hasn't
just
directly said price controls. She said a ban on price gouging, but hasn't really given any details to what that would look like.
Well, she did give some level of details, like I mentioned before. She talked about investigating bad faith actors. So, not those
Right.
exact words, but she talked about looking at companies who raise their prices. And then, so for example, I don't know how she'd identify a target, but it sounded like what she was saying is, again, I don't know how she identified, but somehow she'd identify a potential, someone who might be doing it. So, start an investigation. Okay, so they reported that they had some supply chain issue on this date, and that's why they raised the price. Okay, is that condition still existing? Investigate. Oh, actually, the supply chain issue is resolved, but yet the price is still raised. Investigate further. So, is there another reason why the price is still higher? Can't find anything. Okay, looks like they're taking advantage of their customers, whatever. So we're gonna go ahead and issue a fine or whatever it is. So she didn't go into those details of like how she would enforce it,
That's what
but
I mean. Yeah.
it sounded like that's what she discussed. So that kind of thing is not a price control, right? Because a price control would be setting of prices. And she didn't mention any, she didn't even hint that she was setting any prices. She talked about banning price gouging. A ban is not a price control. It'd be like setting a floor, a ceiling.
Mhm.
So you can't charge more than this for eggs, or you have to charge a minimum of this price for eggs, or something like that, where it's across the board. I don't know of any price control that's a case by case basis. Like a price control will be set where industry standard, this is how prices are to be, as opposed to this type of conduct is going to be penalized. If we find that you're doing this thing, we're going to go after you and you're going to have this punishment, as opposed to setting controls, right? So
Right.
that's my understanding of based on everything that she's discussed. So I just think it's really a smear tactic used against her. And just for the record, um, I'm not a fan of Kamala Harris, but I am a fan of truth. So you know, even if I don't like her, I don't trust her, which I don't. I don't trust her.
Right.
Um, I don't appreciate people trying to distort what she's saying. Right. I want to attack her and criticize her based on what she's actually said and what she's actually doing, as opposed to trickery. So anyway, I just wanted to comment on that. So do you have any, because this is all new to me, any deeper understanding of price controls beyond what I've learned, which is again the price floor, the price ceiling, and in general across the board price setting of some sort? Is there any other type of price control? Because that's all I know about.
Well, you can do what Nixon did, and Nixon put together a council which managed it. It just kind of depends on operationally how you want to do it. It gets really tricky because you have to figure out. You can either do it one of two ways. You can do a generic kind of ban on price gouging kind of thing, and you can do investigations. You can do that, like what Kamala's talked about, and you have to figure that out. That takes time. Or you could do You can do actual price caps, industry standards like you're talking about. You can't charge more than this, or you could set a rule that says,
Yeah, but I think I may be reading this wrong, but it sounds to me like you're talking about different ways that she can accomplish what she's trying to accomplish. But I was more talking about specifically price controls. I only know about the price ceiling and floor as far as that's the only way to do it. Um, is there another method that would be considered a price control other than those?
not necessarily. I mean, you could look at. That's why I said it gets really tricky and really messy because
In terms of how you do it.
yes, because in terms of how you do it, because you can look at different things. You could just pass a generic law that says not about price ceilings or floors that says you cannot increase your prices more than passing on the cost of your supply chain issues, more than this percentage. So there's looking at the cost of the supply chain issues, if that's kind of what you meant, and the passing along of cost, you can address that directly rather than anything else. That might be a more direct way to deal with price controls.
But it sounds like one pattern remains consistent. That it seems like price controls are always sort of an across the board, for lack of a better word, of systematic. It's
Yes.
not. It's not. It's not a. It's not a case. If you break them, then Um, but what it sounds like she's talking about would be very. When I say case by case, it's like what's why did you increase your prices? Okay. Is there still a reason for you to have this price this high? No. Okay, then you might be in violation of this particular rule, right? But anyway, I think we shouldn't get into too much details because we need more details from her. All we can say is that she has not, to this point, indicated anything about price controls. Nothing she
Correct.
says is price controls. She could choose to go that route, but she hasn't given us any details of any kind of price control strategy. So I think anyone that is calling it that at this point is, I think, being a bad faith actor, in my view.
The only thing I'll say about her policy, if it goes the way of investigating, the only thing I'll say is it takes time. A price control is a price control, but something like that takes time because they have to do the investigation, they have to figure it out, and then there may or may not be any kind of refunds for people who paid that higher price during the time where it was deemed that they weren't able to do so. So it's a longer process.
I think, and we'll leave it on that because we want to move on to the other topic. But I think the idea there would, in theory, be incentive. So companies are incentivized to be fair or more fair to the customers because otherwise there could be a price to be paid. And if that price is set appropriately, because
Yes.
of course, they could play tricks on the American people by making the price be inappropriate in terms of ineffective. So,
Mm-hmm.
for example, let's say the fine is like, just to make something very clear, let's say $2,000. I mean, if you're going to fine a corporation $2,000, then that's a scam. I mean, because they're just going to do whatever. That doesn't matter. Who cares about a
Yeah.
$2,000 fine? Okay? If I'm going to make all these millions of dollars extra in profits, and then it's going to cost me $2,000, they're just going to take the fine.
Oh
But
yeah.
if it's appropriate where it'll hurt, then you can incentivize them to be more fair, which in turn it'll be better for the consumers because companies will just avoid it because they're like, we don't want to, because that's going to cut into our profit margins for the year. We don't want to pay those fines, so we're going to avoid this situation. But anyway, let's move on to the.
Absolutely.
So what was the next one? Okay, so critics say MMT encourages reckless government spending and could lead to unsustainable debt levels. How does MMT respond to the concern that it could undermine fiscal responsibility? And we know how much the Republicans care about being fiscally responsible. But anyway, go ahead.
So MMTers like to talk about real fiscal responsibility as opposed to this idea of fake fiscal responsibility of managing the debt and the deficit, because I just want to point something out. Every single time that the government has been in surplus, we've had some kind of crash. Bill Clinton had the deficit, the debts to near zero. We had a crash. Every single time there's been a recession, depression. We don't, because here's what happens. As I was explaining earlier, all the money spent into the economy, and I want to address some of the individual points, but I want to make this point first. All the money spent into the economy has to come from the government. If the government taxes that back in order to quote unquote pay the debt, they've drained the money from the private sector. And people are living beyond their means, crediting, on credit, etc. They're living beyond their means, and there's going to be a crash. And that's happened every single time. So real fiscal responsibility is making sure there's enough money in the economy and that balance is there. But if you want to repeat the question, because I want to go through those individual points really quickly.
So people were just concerned that it's going to lead to reckless spending. Reckless government spending. It could lead to reckless government spending. I'm sorry. It encourages, not it could lead to, but I guess it's the same thing. But anyway, it encourages reckless government spending and could lead to unsustainable debt levels.
So,
which I could see what they're saying, right? If government becomes more, so if they become more loose with the wallet, shall we say, based on this MMT theory, they're like, okay, we have the money. We don't have to worry about, we can put more money for what's those checks, those universal income. Yeah. We can do free healthcare, whatever the programs are. Let's do all these programs because we're no longer worried about the debt, but then I guess push our debt out of control is that's the concern basically.
Okay, so how I'd address
I guess they're pointing to the idea that. Mm-hmm.
So MMT economists would say we can have Medicare for all, we can have a Green New Deal, we can have all these things, not at the exact same time. You don't want to do that much spending at the same time. That would be a bad idea. You can do Medicare for all, and then the next year you can do, or whatever amount of time makes sense, you can do free college, you can do all these policies. You don't want to overstimulate the economy by spending so much and shock the economy, because also it's not about money, it's about resources. So let's say we want to do Medicare for all. Do we have enough doctors to do Medicare for all? Okay, no, not necessarily. That's why even Bernie Sanders' plan was a 4-year transition, because there's things in there to address. And yeah, so
just a quick note. Do you have, and it's okay if you don't know this is kind of a little bit random potentially, do you have any idea what kind of money we're talking about in comparison? So you said like you don't want to do all those programs. Let's just stick with the programs that you mentioned so far. Do you have any idea what that's going to cost compared to our military spending? Because it seems like we're always increasing the military budget, and they're big numbers, right? And I don't see any issues. It's not like, when they approve this massive military budget, it's kind of like, oh my goodness, now the whole economy falls apart. Are we talking about much more money that they've been spending with the military? And I ask that for obvious reason, right? If we can spend all this money in the military and it's no shock to the system, then for this to be a shock, you would have to be talking about much more money than we're spending on the military.
Not necessarily. It may or may not be. The issue becomes the overstimulation of the economy. But I don't think that it would necessarily be more than our military budget. Our military budget is kind of outrageous, honestly. So, and as Lana's pointing out in the chat, the government already spends $3 trillion on healthcare now. Medicare for all costs less.
Yet we survive somehow.
Yeah. So in regards to, I don't think it's going to be more than a military budget. If you add up all the programs together, like every single one of them, it might be 50 or 60% of the military budget. I don't have those numbers in front of me. I'd have to see the cost of everything and what our military budget currently is. But I don't think it would be 100% because, like I said, our military budget is massive.
Right. And so, given the technical issues, I don't want us to push things too far because I know we have a lot of buffering and things like that. So, I'm just going to jump to the final question, which is what would be the potential long term consequences, both positive and negative, of fully adopting MMT policies? How do we balance the promise of economic growth with potential risks? And I like this question because it's one thing when somebody's promoting something, and obviously, not necessarily obviously, but typically they're going to focus on all the positives and how this wonderful things will happen. And one of the big issues is typically they don't want to talk about the negatives or the downsides. And then of course the opponents, that's all they want to talk about, right? They don't want to talk the good that they could do and how it might work. The GOP coming in, they're gonna highlight all.
So I didn't hear anything you said there.
Hello?
Yes, now I can hear you.
I think I lost you.
I'm here. Hello? Can you hear me? Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I was asking you the cons, the long of MMT, and also reference the positives as well. So long term, what are the potential risks, and also what are the potential advantages long term? Like it's going to be a gradual process, right? So
Well, dude, kind of address that question. We've always been in the US, quote unquote, doing MMT. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution says that Congress has the power to coin money, which they do. Every single day, every time a bill is passed, they appropriate new money. So we've been doing this over and over. So the only downside I can see is not necessarily because, like I said, we've been doing this, is that they continue to raise our military budget. And that's what they've chosen to use it for. They appropriate the funds for our military budget. What we should be doing.
Wow, interesting.
Yes. Article 1,
So we
Section 8
so
every
we're
day.
already doing it, but for things we want to do.
Right. Every time they do tax cuts for the rich. We don't need taxes in order to fund expenditures. So they can reduce taxes. They're not going to reduce it for you and I, but they're going to reduce it for the multimillionaires and their corporate donors. So, no, Stephanie Kelton, who's one of the major MMT proponents, was the Senate advisor for Congress. And she said there's a number of Congress people who understand this is how the monetary system works. They understand it and they use it to benefit themselves and they use it to benefit their donors and they use it to raise the military budget and give money to private contractors. When it comes to healthcare, when it came to more relief during COVID, free college, Green New Deal, we don't have any money. Where is the money? During COVID, we spent $2.2 trillion in the blink of an eye. They didn't come to tax us. They didn't say how we're going to pay for it. They just did it. They can do it. They choose not to. So that's the main downside. But MMT policies, there's two policies that have been proposed. One has been proposed by an MMTer, and one is an MMT policy. So one is the federal jobs guarantee. But before that, the payroll tax holiday I want to get into. So the payroll tax holiday was proposed by Warren Mosler. It's got support among progressives and conservatives. And the reason it has support is because it's a stimulus for the people and it's a stimulus for business. If you don't have to pay a payroll tax as a worker and you don't have to pay it as a business, because we understand MMT and we understand that, so you change the law. Social Security Trust Fund is just a spreadsheet. And Medicare Trust Fund, those are spreadsheets. The law says they have to collect taxes. Taxes are destroyed anyway, but there's numbers on the spreadsheet. If you change that law and you say that Congress appropriates the funding for Social Security and Medicare, you can eliminate the payroll tax. And it's a huge stimulus to workers, and it's a stimulus to business because they no longer have to pay that tax. So that's number one MMT policy, and that's a stimulus. Number two is the federal jobs guarantee. So MMT advocates for everyone to be offered a job if they want it. This is not a forced jobs program. This is not anything like that. It's a job. You, depending on who's proposing it, it could be at a non-disruptive wage. It could be at an inclusive, socially inclusive living wage. But
Is this like Job Corps by any chance?
Job Corps. Do you want to define that real quick?
I don't know. Job Corps was something from the 90s. It was something, I think it was the federal job. It was some kind of, I don't know if it was targeted at younger people. Let me see. Job Corps. I just remember back in the late 90s, they talked about.
Yeah. Oh yes, ZIRP, zero interest rate policy. I'm being told in the chat. I can that one next. That's the third MMT policy. Selling bonds at a zero interest rate.
Says.
Yeah.
So it looks like it says it's the largest free residential. Oh my goodness. The page just refreshed. So education seems to be part of it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely some kind of free education, which leads to jobs. But I want to see about the jobs part. Are they actually employing? I think so, because I remember people. Anyway, it's just into
probably something like that, but on a larger scale.
So we definitely clarify, but that opinion. I have to accept the possibility that maybe they actually are good faith, and this is an actual concern. The concern is, and I know we kind of talked about this, but I want
Hmm.
Constraints. Like, look at me, for example, me with my truck broken down. I got a neighbor, I need that truck, and I technically have the money. I could just send it to a mechanic and pay the whatever hundreds of dollars, right?
Mhm.
But if I keep doing that, I'm gonna run into problems because I have limits on how much credit that's available to me, and also the more I put on credit cards, the interest on the credit card. The cash is limited. So if I just keep spending too much, I'll run out of cash and pay minimum for the rest of your life and never pay it off. So that's why you and I, can't just. That's why we have to make sacrifices on things that we need because of the risks. But people argue that the government doesn't work that way, right? But the people who don't agree with that, they say, I think the typical thing is they say the problem for the government is not like us with the credit card debt and whatever. For the government, they always talk about inflation. I think that's the main thing they talk about. I don't know what else they talk about, but um,
Right.
what what is why is it that spending by 40%, right? Next year we increase spending by 40% for a bunch of social programs. Why? Hello?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay. Did you get the question?
No.
Oh, you didn't hear any of that?
I heard 40% social programs next year.
Okay, so if we were to increase our if we increased our spending by 40% for a bunch of social programs, now we understand that they don't, the government doesn't have like us, limited uh, what's the word? I'm doing a Joe Biden right now. What's the credit limits? Let's call it credit
Yeah.
limits. They don't have a credit card with like $1,000 credit limit or something like that, so it runs out quick. Um, I assume they have an equivalent of the interest stuff, right? Because if we borrow, we do have to make interest payments. But I guess the bottom line is, why is it that that's not devastating? That wouldn't be devastating for the government when it would be devastating to us as individuals, but not the government. How does that work?
Okay. So works like this, and I just really want to quickly, when the government borrows, and I don't want to get too technical, but when the government borrows, let's
Mhm.
say we trade with China, right? We get more stuff, they get dollars, which are our dollars. They then decide they get an account at the Federal Reserve. They've decided I'm the Chinese government. I don't want to hold these dollars. I'd rather have a bond. So I'm going to go buy a bond. I'm going to call up the Federal Reserve. I'm going to tell them switch my dollars into a bond, right? So now I'd rather accrue interest. That's fine. Those are our dollars. We're essentially borrowing from ourselves because we spent that money into the economy. And then every time the interest payments come due, all we do is mark up the number in their account. It really doesn't make a difference. Same if you buy a bond. But why doesn't it matter for the government? It's precisely for that reason. But the government's credit limit isn't money. The government's credit limit is resources. Okay, so I'm going to steal something from Stephanie Kelton, one of her examples. If I'm in Congress and I propose a bill for everyone to get a pony, right? And we pass that bill. The funding is there, but are there enough ponies for everyone in the US to get a pony?
Well,
Necessarily.
how about I guess I guess it'd be better if we, because there's a lot of different types of spending, right? So let's talk about a specific type of spending that I think is pretty
Okay.
big. We're not going to get into the logistics of how much and whatever. Let's just talk about a dollar figure. So we have approved universal basic income, and it's going to cost the government an extra, let's say, $2 trillion a year. So all of a sudden, we've increased our spending, our annual spending, by $2 trillion. But this is an interesting thing because this is purely money. So it's not, it's in terms of, you talked about resources. This would be, from my understanding, a digital thing, right? Because it's not like there's no gold backing it, right? So wouldn't they just literally be typing in numbers on a computer?
Exactly.
It shows up in our accounts as transfers.
That's it.
But I would think the fair would be the more money you put out there, the right.
The more money. What was the last thing you said?
Because that's kind of how. Say again.
I didn't hear you. Said the more money you put out there.
Hello.
Yes.
The lower the value of the money.
Not necessarily.
So the value of the dollar of the value can be affected negatively by us introducing too much money into the system at once.
That depends. That's a really complicated question. Yeah. So a UBI would actually likely be an inflationary policy. That's why most MMTers propose the job guarantee, because
Right.
it's not necessarily inflation.
Let's say, can you hear me?
Yes, now I can. Go ahead. Okay, so UBI could be inflationary. It's not necessarily going to drive the value of the dollar down per se. What it's going to do is people are going to have more money, spend, they're going to spend it. Rent will likely go up unless you have rent control policies, things like that. And that's why most MMT proponents propose a job guarantee. I don't know what the question you were going to ask, so I kind of just started talking, but you want to go ahead?
Yeah, no problem. So I'm actually going to go ahead and end the live stream because we've had quite a bit of problems here with the connection.
So I would be happy to come back and do a pre-recorded or another live stream,
right.
So we can get something a little cleaner if you'd like.
Right. So let me go ahead and do end the live stream. Just hang on for a second. Stop cam. I'll just remove you from the studio. All right, guys. I appreciate your patience, and I'm so sorry for all the technical difficulties. I'm going to take the blame for that. Unfortunately, my housing situation is currently challenged. So I'm kind of in a basement, and maybe that's the issue. I guess I need to, and I haven't done any live streams in this environment. The last time I did a live stream was a long time ago, and that was when I was living like a normal person. So as you can see, you look at my roof, it's not even painted. You see the seams. I was in my apartment before, and I had a much stronger internet connection. My internet has been fine for my purposes, but apparently you need a much more bandwidth to do live streams, much more than I have apparently. So I'm going to have to figure that out. But for now, we're going to do this offline, and then we'll upload the video so it's nice and clean and not all the buffering and whatever. It's an important conversation. I really want to make sure that you guys get the information, but I want to give it to you in a good format that's without all the technical difficulties. But again, I appreciate your patience. And thank you for your time. Thank you, Shane, for coming in and sharing this information, and also volunteering to do it again offline, and then we'll upload it. But you guys know we tried. We're not trying to hide anything. We're ready to do it live. I was ready to ask Shane all the tough questions. I am nonpartisan. I'm a political dissident. So I'm not left wing. I'm not right wing, and I'm certainly not any enlightened centrist. So I will definitely challenge Shane even more if we can have a better format to do so. But I think we got a pretty good live stream. And again, thank you, everyone. And I'm going to go ahead and end the live stream. I want to just comment in the comment section here. Thank you, Willie, the Willie Bragg Show. Thanks for joining. Thank you, Lana, for joining. Thank you. Who else do we have? Lena. Okay, that was you. Okay, thanks, guys. We're going to go ahead and end the live stream. Thank you again. Have a great night. And this is Debate Me channel. Debate me in the comment section below. Click on the like button, subscribe, smash that bell. Be well.